Sometimes in our world, the craziest things can happen that just don't seem believable, and today's story is a perfect example of this. But before we get into the story, if you're a fan of true crime, mysteries, and strange occurrences, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a friend. And now that you've done so, let's open the vault. In 1983, in the town of Honey Grove, Texas, there was a businessman named Henry who met a beautiful girl named Macy. Macy was a young girl who was almost immediately struck by Henry, and very quickly the two started dating. At first, their relationship went very well, as Henry was a respected businessman who was able to buy things for Macy, and Macy was also just in love with Henry's personality and his character, and she just was very happy with him. And Henry was also very happy with Macy, as she was this beautiful girl who completely adored him, and they shared similar interests, and they laughed and had fun together, and it really did seem like this couple was just perfect together. However, Henry wasn't really interested in anything like a serious relationship when it came to dating. He was a young businessman who was getting started with his timber business, and he was perfectly content to just date Macy and be around her and hang out with her whenever he had the time. But alternatively, Macy was completely in love with Henry, and she did want to get married. So after a while of dating and getting to know one another, Macy would actually approach Henry and talk to him about what their plans were and suggest to him that she did want to get married eventually. And when Macy approached Henry, he was completely put off by her words, thinking that she just wanted to marry him because he was a businessman and she just wanted him because of money. And he thought that she was probably just going to tie him down, and he didn't really want that at this time. So his initial response was just no, and he told Macy that he actually needed some space. So Macy was hurt by this, but out of respect for Henry, she said okay, and she gave Henry some space. But then after a couple of weeks, she actually went back to go talk to Henry to see what the status was. But when she went back that second time, Henry would tell her that he just wanted to break up. He really wanted nothing to do with her because this was getting too serious, and he didn't want to get married. Macy was devastated by this news. She couldn't believe that the person that she loved so deeply and had felt like she had such a connection with would just push her off to the side and break up with her when all she wanted was a deeper and more meaningful relationship. And unfortunately, Macy was actually so devastated and so hurt by Henry that she would end up taking her own life because of depression in the weeks after Henry broke up with her. And when Henry heard that his ex-girlfriend had killed herself because of depression after he broke up with her, he wasn't really fazed by it. After all, they were broken up, and it wasn't really any of his business anyway. And he had some important business to attend to, so he didn't actually end up even going to Macy's funeral. Instead, he just went back to work. But Macy's family was also devastated by what Henry had done, and they couldn't believe that Henry would treat their daughter and their sister so terribly, and to the point where she would end up killing herself and then show such relative indifference to her death. And Macy actually had a brother who was so furious with Henry because of this incident that he would actually end up making a plan to get revenge. Henry was the owner of a timber business, so he was often out in the woods cutting trees down to be taken to the mill. So Macy's brother decided that if Macy was dead because of what Henry had done, then Henry should be dead too. So he purchased a pistol which he planned to use to shoot Henry, and then he made a plan to go into the woods and kill Henry while he was at work. So on the day that he had planned, Macy's brother went out into the woods to the place where he knew Henry would be out cutting down trees to take to the mill, and he just waited around in the bushes waiting for Henry to come up and begin getting to work. And sure enough, as planned, it wasn't long before he saw Henry coming up the road and began setting up his work equipment. So as Henry was setting up his saws and work equipment, he looks up and he sees a man coming after him holding a gun. And before Henry could react or do anything, Macy's brother pointed the gun at him and shot one bullet at his chest. And Henry, with a stunned look of shock in his eyes, just fell to the ground with his back against a tree. And now that Henry was dead, the brother realized that he had done what he had set out to do. But now with his sister dead, he felt like he really had nothing else to live for. And now, knowing that he had killed Henry, he knew that if he got caught, he would either spend the rest of his life in jail or possibly be sentenced to death for first-degree murder. So now that his mission was complete, he turned the pistol around on himself and pulled the trigger, killing himself instantly. But Henry wasn't dead. In fact, he was barely even wounded. When the brother had shot the gun at him, the bullet had missed his chest and passed through the flesh on his arm, and the bullet had stuck into the tree behind him. But Henry had just fallen to the ground, hoping that his assailant would think he was dead before shooting him again. So Henry's just lying there, completely conscious, watching the man who had just shot him take a couple steps closer to him before taking the gun, turning it around, and shooting himself. And Henry just thinks that he must be the luckiest man in the world. So he got up, went down to the local hospital to get his arm bandaged up, and then went back to his business and got on with his life. Fast forward more than 20 years, and Henry was still living in the same town and still operating the very same business. By now, he had in fact gotten married and now lived in Texas with his wife and a few children. And his timber business was still doing very well, and he would still go every day into the woods to chop down trees to take to the mill. In those days, a popular way of cutting down bigger trees would be to drill holes in the base of the tree and detonate dynamite at the bottom of the tree to knock the tree over, which would save a lot of time from having to cut the tree down. And as Henry and his son were in the woods, looking for trees to cut down, they come across one rather large tree that looked like it was going to be difficult to cut down by hand. So instead of trying to do so, the two decide that they would use the dynamite method to cut this tree down. So Henry and his son used drills to drill holes in the base of the tree in order to be able to put in the sticks of dynamite. This only took them a few minutes, as it was something that both of them had done 100 times before. So they get the holes drilled in the base of the tree and they put in the sticks of dynamite at the base, and then they let out the fuse and they stand back about 50 feet away from the tree. But there was something different about this particular tree. You see, this was the exact same tree that Henry had fallen against 20 years earlier when he got shot by Macy's brother. And Henry and his son were now standing in nearly the same spot that Henry's assailant had been standing when he shot him 20 years ago. And the bullet from that pistol was still stuck in the same tree that Henry was now drilling holes in to blow up. In 20 years' time, this bullet had never hit the ground. So Henry lit the fuse to detonate the dynamite, and then he and his son stood about 50 feet back to watch as the base of the tree exploded. And as it did, the bullet that was lodged in the wood of the tree was suddenly dislodged by the explosion set off by Henry, and it launched itself quickly through the air and struck Henry directly in the left temple, killing him instantly. Though it had taken more than 20 years for that bullet to travel from the barrel of the gun to Henry's head, it had indeed made that journey without hitting the ground. And Macy and her brother finally had their revenge, even though both of them had been dead for more than 2 decades. So that's it, guys. Thank you for watching this quick episode. Please let me know in the comments what you thought of this kind of story. I definitely like to cover true crime on this channel, but I also want it to be a channel that expands into other types of short stories that are just more strange and mysterious like this one. Let me know what kind of stuff you like best, and of course let me know what you would like to see next. In the near future, I'm going to be doing some crazy true crime stories and maybe even another serial killer or two. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of those future videos, and thank you so much for your support. So that's it for this one. I'll see you guys soon, but until then, be safe out there.